Well, here we are back with Wayne Jett in part two of my interview with him, author of The Fruits of Graft. Please do reach out to me if you have any questions or would like to talk about it. And please do share the video as you see fit. All right. Thank you.
But
Yeah,
it's a subject that that gets me activated whenever I try to talk about it.
yeah, I can see
I
that.
covered it in detail, and I do so in specific terms, much more specific than I can do in recalling on a daily basis all of the ins and outs. But
Yeah,
it was a planned depression. The 1918 epidemic of flu that killed so many vibrant, young, childbearing age people by the millions in America and in the world was a bioweapon, in my opinion, uh, of the nature that we are experiencing now, but one that was very deadly at that time for sure, and did not come from Spain. So
so
let me pause and give you a chance to direct things the way you'd like.
yeah, well, I just wanted to go back to the part where they increased the reserves on the bank. So that would also mean that the banks were not making any loans. If they're pulling all these loans off the farm, let's say, that also means that they're not giving any other new loans.
Oh, that certainly correct. And
I mean, it would
that
only
is
make
why,
sense.
as I said earlier, by 1938, in the elections, when the Democrats lost 83 seats in the House, I think that's a record. Um, it was called the Roosevelt Depression,
Hmm.
and yet people like John Kenneth Galbraith, the so-called great economist from Harvard, that wrote the book like that, that thick, on the Great Depression, says it's just too complicated to understand how it might have happened. Well, it's not at all too complicated. I have only touched um, a principal aspect of what they did time and again. Foreign trade. Hoover allowed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act to pass and signed it into law. Uh, the Tariff Act itself would not have been so damaging, but it was picked as the signal by the market manipulators, the globalists who planned the Great Depression and planned the Great Crash. It was a planned so-called revolutionary event. Uh, we have evidence of that from a high-level cabal member who was captured by Stalin and interrogated in 1938. I didn't learn about that until late in the preparation of my book, and so it is in chapter 17, not in the early parts.
Can I ask you how long did you spend writing the book?
I think, as I recall, I started in about 2005, 2006. I looked into the personal diary that was published of the Treasury Secretary Morgenthau, Henry Morgenthau Jr., starting about that time in 2005. And I found an item there pretty quickly that I mentioned to Jude Winniski, with whom I was working at that time, the great supply sider and great market forecaster. Had a firm called Polyconomics, and I worked with him for some time after I got into that aspect of work. I mentioned what I'd found to him on that item, and he immediately said, "You've got to write a book on that and and get this out. He had written a book explaining the Great Crash, he thought, that turned out to be a very important book, acknowledged in the 20th century among the most important nonfiction.
What's the title of that book? Do you recall?
I apologize. I cannot seem to
okay.
bring it to mind, but
Yeah, it may come.
yes. But in any event, I really didn't want to write a book. I knew how hard it is to do that, how much time it takes. It took me. He died later that year. I'm very sorry to report, Jude, of a heart attack. And one thing or another, I then had more time to devote to it and decided that I'd better look some more. If he felt that strongly about it on that one thing, I'd look some more. And I didn't take very long to find a number of additional things that were reported that were very, very incriminating in terms of the intentional actions to make the depression deeper and longer. And I relate one particular experience that Morgenthau goes into in quite some detail about his efforts in 1939, March of 1939, to persuade Roosevelt that, boy, we could have a boom within a month if you could agree to this plan for across-the-board tax cuts that I've got. I want to bring it to you, and so on and so on. And make that story as short as possible, he took his plan 2 days later to Roosevelt's Oval Office with his assistant or undersecretary of state. And in the process, they were demeaned by, your plan is very silly. This is not about recovery. This is a matter of politics. And as they were slinking out of the office from Roosevelt, he calls to him as they're going through the door, according to Morgenthau's diary, for God's sake, don't be so innocent.
Wow. Wow.
It is a story that needs to be understood now because of what we're undergoing now.
Yeah. So your perception is that things really haven't changed. And that actually brings up the next question. So at what point, how was it that they really came out of the Great Depression then? And then in the after World War II, we saw the greatest expansion in history here in this country.
Well, I don't know that it was the greatest expansion in history. We actually had a tremendously expanding
thank you for the
economy in 1920s.
Okay.
And it was primarily under the president who was derided as Silent Cal. Calvin Coolidge became president because he was vice president when Warren Harding was assassinated. He died of poisoning, but clearly an assassination. But between Calvin Coolidge, starting in 1922-23, Congress wouldn't adopt tax cuts the way he proposed. But finally, he was able to get a tax cut through, a small one. And indeed, it produced a surplus in the Treasury for the next year. And so he plowed that into getting another one and plowed the next one into getting another one. And every tax cut he got made the economy grow faster. And we had the booming, roaring 20s. The crash was sort of presaged as soon as Hoover was elected in November of 28, this is before the 29 crash, there was a sharp drop in the economy when, right after the election in November of 28, Hoover, who had been elected in a landslide because everyone had such a high opinion of him, announced that he would not be having any more tax cuts, that he had plenty of uses for the funds, that the government had not been nearly active enough. And there was something like a 2 or 3% correction in the economy, in the stock market, like overnight. But Hoover, I'm sorry, was an operative. The reason Coolidge didn't run again, he refused to run again in 28, I believe, was because his young son in the White House died suddenly of unreported causes, unknown causes, right after playing tennis on the White House tennis court. And it seemed to me that that was most likely an assassination as a message to Coolidge to leave office. And despite practically begging by the Republican Party, he could have been reelected in a landslide. He would not do so, and so Hoover was tapped. I was not aware that Hoover, apparently, I reported in the book, was in conversations, reportedly in conversations with Franklin Roosevelt in 1920 to run for office then as president and vice president. I'm not sure which one was on top of the ticket. I think I maybe reported in my book, but I don't remember it this minute. But nevertheless, as a Democrat, of course, but Roosevelt refused to do it because he quite sure was astute enough to know that with Wilson's record of violating every promise that he made to the Democrats were not going to be reelected, particularly with taxes as high as they were. And you know, the Warren Harding ticket with Coolidge was won election in 1920 on the basis of basically return to normalcy, which meant cutting taxes. And then they failed to do it. Or at least Harding was kept from doing it in any meaningful way. But those were the kinds of things that were going on all through that period of time. The cabal was with us the entire time. I report in chapter 17 in my book that there was, in fact, in 1901, a plan revealed to the world in writing, in English, of destroying the middle class worldwide completely.
For the purpose of?
For the purpose of getting rid of this so-called democracy and the crazy idea that we ought to have a middle class, that the only stable and acceptable approach to society is a two-class system of rulers and servants or slaves. That was the age-old, and the book said it in so many words, describing by the year 2000, they would have had to destroy democracy, so-called, entirely, and destroy the middle class entirely. The entire fabric of society would have to go down in the process. And by the year 2000, they intended to learn how to poison all of the people of the world that they did not want. They described them in color skinned, black, brown, dirty skinned whites, yellow, red, so forth and so on. And I say those things because the author of that book was made famous by it, highly respected, made highly respected by it, was invited to the White House of Theodore Roosevelt as the honored guest, on the arm of the woman who was the founder of Planned Parenthood. They love the abortion thing. And the honored guest came out of that reception with Teddy Roosevelt, singing his praises as the human demigod of whom I have dreamed. H.G. Wells, the author, was a scribe, in my opinion. It wasn't out of his imagination that he wrote that. He was basically selected as the writer to get the plan out. It was hidden in the back of a small book. Not in the back, it was about 2/3 of the book. But the first third was completely throwaway stuff. And then all of this was revealed in the rest of the book. And
do you recall the title to that book you're speaking of?
I don't right at this moment. If you can bear with me a second, I might.
Oh, it's in your book.
Oh, most certainly.
Okay. Well, that's fine. So people should, if they're interested, they should get your book.
Well, I'm not doing that. I wish my memory were better at all times, but I get off on these rolls and then.
Me too. I wish mine was better.
Yeah.
Actually, I think yours is excellent. The things that you remember, the dates.
That book was called Anticipations, is the short. It's got a very long scholarly type title, Anticipations of the Reactions of Society to Progress and Mechanization, or something like that. But it's called Anticipations by H.G. Wells. And H.G. Wells from that time was a celebrated academic figure worldwide. He traveled the world. He visited FDR in the White House, FDR and Eleanor, for weeks at a time on 3 different occasions, thinking that he had an even higher opinion of FDR than he'd had of Theodore, both of which were very high. And he also had a very high opinion of Joe Stalin, and visited the Kremlin often during his career. So it doesn't take a genius to put these things together and understand what has been going on in the high powers of society. When, as Henry George said, this powerful pecuniary interest writes laws and molds thoughts in every nation worldwide. And part of the plan that H.G. Wells wrote out was there would be shadow governments set up around every national government so that they could weaken those national governments and pull them down, so that as each of them fails, they can be rolled into the global control. That's been their plan ever since. It was very clearly spelled out in the H.G. Wells book. And as I say, I learned of that one late in my research. My book was practically complete. That's why I put it as chapter 17. The rest of the book was not written with anticipations in mind, and therefore a pattern to respond to it. It was written based on other evidence. And then I put in the proof that I had. Chapter 17 contains 2 parts. The first part is about anticipations and the plan in advance for the 20th century. And the second part of chapter 17 is based upon a very short, you can hardly call it a book. It's 1 chapter in a much larger book that was first printed in Spanish, because the transcript was found on the body of a dead man in Russia during the war, near the end of the war. And it was taken, the man who found it was a Spanish volunteer fighting on the side of the Russians. He took it back to Spain, and it was published by a major publisher there in Spain, in Spanish. And then it was eventually, years later, translated into English by a Russian emigre to the United States. And that Russian emigre gave a copy to a publisher in Los Angeles that I was speaking with about the possibility of publishing my book. He was the publisher at the time of
what a coincidence.
Another book that is escaped me at the point, the one written by the Georgetown professor who was Bill Clinton's academic advisor. And in any event, that pamphlet containing that one chapter in English, translated by the Russian emigre, was given to me by that publisher. It was called The Red Symphony. And it is the transcript and more prepared of the interrogation by Stalin's KGB of an elitist operative who was a major elitist operative in Russia. He had been, under Stalin, the Soviet ambassador to France from the Soviet Union. But he was captured and arrested in 1937-38 as an elitist operative, that is a Trotskyite. Trotsky was viewed by Stalin as being a globalist as opposed to a Russian. And of course, he chased him out and eventually assassinated him. But the interrogation of this operative by the KGB was done under circumstances in which the man responsible for recording the interrogation was a physician who was very capable in using medications to make a person feel better and to relieve their anxieties and to speak more freely and lucidly. And this person under interrogation, reported in the Red Symphony, was so brilliant. He was already under sentence of death and to be executed when the interrogation took place. And the interrogation he gave with full lucidity, I suspect in the hope that Stalin would keep him alive. There are two sets of views on it. Some say that he was kept alive. Others say that he went ahead and executed him. I tend to think he was kept alive because I think he told Stalin a number of things he did not know. And among them were that he was among the people at the major banks who transmitted money from the West into Russia to fund the Bolsheviks in 1917. And that he had been an operative ever since. And he was at a high level, but he said it was done so secretively that he never knew anybody that was making the decisions. He described that in quite some detail. He also described some activities with Germany that I'm pretty sure Stalin didn't know about, that would have been important to Stalin regarding the war. And there are a number of things like that, many more than I can go into here.
Yeah.
But he wound up by saying, trying to prove that he was telling as much as he knew about the globalist cabal, that the most important operative ever in political levels was Franklin Roosevelt, And in fact, he referred to him as that two-being person, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, because apparently he felt that Eleanor was such an important part of that operation that he more or less kept Franklin in the right vein, and together they were extremely effective in advancing the globalist agenda. So those are things like that
things like that is, again,
make it proof positive of what we're experiencing and what we were.
Even today.
2011, when my book was published, I had not a whole lot of reason to think that we got a way out of this, because it was very late in the game.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, 5 years later, we have someone come down. Actually, it was 4 years later, he came down the escalator with his wife. And I've certainly been persuaded by my observations that that was a very historic thing, because otherwise the plans for the 2016 term of the presidency were not on the bright side for ordinary Americans, or the rest of the world for that matter. But there we are.
Here we are.
A long time, but
yeah, we're at about an hour here. But I, as I mentioned to you yesterday, I've had your book, but I haven't read it yet. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. It does, obviously, now I'm queued up to read it.
Well, let me tell you, I say it in all honesty, the book is written far better than I can express from memory. I mean, it's just, I felt it was so important at the time. I actually was persuaded at one point to employ an editor from a school back east to assist, and even advanced some funds for that purpose. And after a couple of months and nothing from him, he basically, a man connected with one of the universities, basically gave me my money back and the transcript back. And I am happy to say I had the assistance of two of my sisters who were excellent readers.
Yeah.
They didn't edit, but they could read and understand well enough to know when I was not being as clear as I needed to be. And so they were very helpful in that way, in pointing out places and getting me to relook at things. Because, once you get that much written, everything starts looking the same after a while.
Yes, I would imagine.
With a separate eye, two separate sets of eyes, they really did a great service and assisted me in places that I was able to clean up. And so I was quite pleased when the final product came out, and I still am at this point. So
yeah. I mean, just the little scanning that I've done just about reading, and I love to read. I read a lot. It's very easy. It's written very plainly. Let's put it that way. So it's easy to understand. It's not.
I believe it is understandable.
Yeah.
And even the economics part of it, and the fraud that has been perpetrated just unendingly, even to this day, through the Federal Reserve and through the economists that so-called practice Keynesianism.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, it's like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. Keynesianism tries to make things very, very small and way out in the distance, and very complicated. So you really don't know what they're doing. And then they're using all of these methods behind the scenes to do exactly the opposite of what they should be doing. Supply side, or what I call classical economics, is the answer, very straightforwardly, and has been, in my opinion, as much of the Trump agenda has used that approach as much as possible. Simply, that is the sensible kinds of things of what are in our best interests and what things are not. So I'm still at this point very hopeful that these kind of programs are going to be made to last, and that we're going to be able to implement them if we can resolve this electoral problem that we've, I think, still have at the present time.
That we found ourselves in. Yeah. Well, Wayne, maybe we can get together again and do some more. I'm going to start to read your book, and maybe we can go through it as time allows, and do this again.
Well, it may very well be that just reading it will inspire your own writing, your own efforts, and things. This is a, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be able to be finally enlightened on matters of this kind, which I certainly was, based on the research that I was able to do. And in that circumstance, I'm putting it out there, and I've had to raise the book price to $28 from $25. I actually had it priced at $35 when I started in 2011. But I reduced it in order to try to get into more hands, try to get into more libraries, public libraries. Public libraries have been very, very few of them have been interested. And so I would try to persuade your audience, get your public libraries to get them, get your schools to get them. It is a readable book, and I think is highly informative on a number of levels as far as what people need to know about how our government is run, and how to interpret these activities that are so clearly globalist inspired. They're trying to pull down all national governments, certainly the US included, but every other government as well, so they can have a global dictatorship. That was the clear message of the 1901 book. I mean, it's in English, easy to read. And they say it just as in your face as they can. Of course, it was only intended for the elitists to read. There was only one book in California, actual copy of it, and it was 2 or 3 blocks from my house, at a foundation there that I live very close by. I happen to know the head of research there, and I asked him to make that available to me. And after a few months of delay, he finally had his secretary get in touch with me and tell me that I could come over and look at it within the confines of the room. I couldn't take it out. And but she was kind enough to tell me that it's in the online library of the University of Chicago. And so I got it through there, and was able to read it that way. That was the way I was able to actually read that H.G. Wells book. But
Anticipations.
A nasty little book that, I mean, nasty is way too kind in terms of its intentions for humanity. And yet to see how academics and the news media and so forth have practically worshipped the guy ever since is truly abominable. So
Anyway, yeah.
Thanks for
yeah,
asking, and I'll let you go anytime you're ready.
Well,
I will say that my website is classicalcapital.com.
very good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Wayne, this morning, and look forward to continuing our conversation.
All right. Thanks for having me, and a pleasure, Ray.
All right. Adios. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.